I think we are ready to get started. Again, welcome to this week's office hours for ESG and ESG CV. My name is Shavonna McCaleb, and I am today's moderator. If you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. As a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for public record. A copy of the slide deck and recording will be emailed to all attendees. Next slide, please. How to ask the question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your organization and question into the chat box. The team will read questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers, if possible, throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered into the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Next slide, please. Today's office hours session agenda includes the following: ESG and ESG CV updates, office hours updates, upcoming trainings, ESG and ESG CV Q&A, spotlight series presentation on HMIS overview. Next slide, please. And now I will hand it over to Sarah for ESG updates.
Good morning, everyone. So I just wanted to touch base with everyone in regards to the 2021 ESG contracts. The 2021 standard agreements are routing very nicely. We have approximately 20 contracts that are currently executed at this time. Remember to upload your signed copy of the 213 when accepting your award. We actually have quite a few people that we are still waiting on them to upload the 213 and accept that award. If you're unsure how to do that, please make sure that you reach out either to me personally or to the ESG NOFA box at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. Remember, if you have been awarded homelessness prevention funding and you have not turned in your updated policies and procedures for us to review and approve, do not forget to do so. Remember, we will not reimburse any HP expenses until this process has been completed. So avoid recapture. What that means is, remember, based on your exhibits, you have a 20% expenditure milestone deadline, and that is 120 days from execution date. If your contract has been executed and you need help navigating the eCivis system to complete your RFS or to add additional people from your agency to manage your award, please make sure you reach out to esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov, and of course we will provide TA to you. Next slide, please. So avoid receiving STD 209s and reimbursement delays. I went over this last time, but I'm going to go over it again. All of the 2021 contracts are managed in eCivis. So all requests for funds must be submitted via eCivis. Please do not email requests to your representative. Every request for funds must also include a completed detailed expense report. Remember to redact all PII and only use the HMIS numbers when it comes to clients. We will also be conducting a mini monitoring for every reimbursement request. So we will be picking anywhere from 3 to 4 line items chosen by your HCD representative, and it may also include complete client files. Remember, when we are requesting the mini monitoring documents, that you do need to upload it to the secure SharePoint, not eCivis. So be sure to have your supporting documentation ready to submit when requested. Next slide, please. 2022 applications. We literally just started reviewing those yesterday. So we expect to have these completed by November so that we can still announce awards in December. Remember, if you only turned in a draft resolution and you have the executed signed resolution, please reach out to esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov so that we can get that final resolution in your application. Reminder, you cannot add additional persons from your organization to view that application or award until a contract has been executed. Next slide, please. So this week's weekly spotlight is going to be street outreach. I'm going to touch on all of the different policies that ICF has so generously written and helped guide us with on our webpage. So the requirements of the policy are intended to ensure that subrecipients create and run ESG SO projects that, one, comply with all applicable federal laws, statutes, and regulations, provide assistance that is tailored to each participant's specific needs and housing barriers, and implement best practices for meeting people experiencing unsheltered homelessness where they are and connecting them to housing resources in person-centered way that is tailored and paced for each individual or household. Next slide, please. So projects are required to develop and implement written policies and procedures, P&Ps, that fully detail their ESG SO operations. So just to let everybody know, this is a condensed version for presentation, so it does not include all the details or requirements. So please make sure you review our current street outreach policy for all detailed requirements. So at a minimum, they must include your written standards. Those have to be consistent and comply with ESG, HCD, HCD's local subrecipient, and COC written standards and project implementation. Have to include the coverage area where services will be provided, geographic areas served, how the project will ensure it reaches the people experiencing unsheltered homelessness and who are least likely to request services. Next slide, please. Coordinated entry integration. So detail how the street outreach project will participate in the local coordinated entry system, CES, to ensure participants' quick connections to resources available. Participant eligibility, detail how eligibility is established, documented, and must acknowledge that the lack of third-party documentation must not be a barrier to enrollment in ESG SO projects. Gosh, that's a mouthful. And that's per the ESG program interim rule, which is a requirement. Suite of services. I always like this one. Details on all services that will be provided by the project, process for assessing each participant's individual strengths, housing barriers, and developing individualized case management plans to quickly return the participant to safe, stable, permanent housing. Your staffing patterns, which will be the size of staff and duties, process for entering participant data into and maintaining data in HMIS in a timely manner. Next slide, please. Housing problem solving, HPS. Detail how you're going to approach including record keeping requirements, standard interventions, as well as diversion and rapid exit services. Remember, ESG SO projects are required to provide diversion and, oops, I put RAID, rapid exit services. Sorry, I guess I should use spell check. Other requirements. P&Ps must also meet any other requirements and documents other than our street outreach policy. So other sources may include, but not limited to, federal laws, statutes, regulations, California HCD policy regarding federal awards generally, and the ESG program specifically, and the local COC. For general operations, you must provide sufficient information about the operation of the project so that a person that is unfamiliar with the project could reasonably reconstruct it from your P&Ps. Termination and appeals. Projects are required to develop a termination and appeals process and policy. This policy must comply with all requirements in 24 CFR 576.402, as well as projects application to California HCD grant award and contract, ESG written standards, and COC written standards. Next slide, please. So reminder, be sure to review HCD's street outreach policy. Make sure you update or develop your own agency's policies and procedures surrounding street outreach. And HCD, just like the HP policies that I had mentioned earlier that we will be reviewing and approving, we will be doing the same thing for street outreach and soon to come rapid rehousing. Remember, we are here to help. So if you have any questions or concerns, please make sure you reach out to us at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. Next slide, please. Remember our ESG webpage. If you click on the resources tab where the green arrow is, next slide, please. That is going to take you to all of our policy documents. Make sure that you do review each and every one, because like I said, as we are creating and implementing these new policies, we will be requesting your updated P&Ps so that we can review and approve them. Next slide, please. And once again, our ESG team representatives, we have Diana Prado, Giovanni Martinez, Tuesday Cool, Sam Liu, and Anthony Cepeda. So please reach out to your ESG representative listed above, or you can contact us at esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. Next slide, please. And that is all that I have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Now I have just a few ESG CV updates and reminders. HCD is now amending ESG CV contracts to extend the contract expiration date to 12/31/2023. ESG CV contract amendments are currently routing. Be on the lookout for your pending amendment to arrive via email. The authorized signer must sign the STD 213. Email the signed agreement to HCD Contracts Office as soon as possible. Contact your GA if you have any questions. Next slide, please. The new term of agreement and performance milestones are as follows. The agreement will expire on December the 31st, 2023. All program funds for projects, street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention shall be expended by September the 30th, 2023. All funds for HMIS and administrative costs shall be expended by October 31st, 2023. All final funds requests shall be submitted to the department by November the 15th, 2023. Next slide, please. In accordance with HUD's expenditure deadlines include the CPD 2206 ESG CV notice. Grantee must meet the following expenditure deadlines for ESG CV funding. Should the grantee not meet the following expenditure requirements, HCD reserves the right to recapture any unspent ESG CV awarded funds up to the maximum amount listed below. 75% is the percent that needs to be spent by January the 31st, 2023. The difference between 75% of the total award and the amount drawn in IDIS as of January the 31st, 2023. Next slide, please. Once you have received your executed amendment, you can submit an RFF through eCivis. Please note, this round of extension amendments does not include tribal grantees. Tribal grantees agreements will be addressed later. Next slide, please. Upcoming office hours topics. 921, monitoring refresher. 928, PII policy. 10.5, housing problem solving. 10.12, match clinic office hours. All requests to HCD for certifications of consistency with consolidated plan should be sent to Alexis Narvo. On this slide, we also have the training site to register for office hours series, and for previous office hours recordings, there's a link on this slide as well. Next slide, please. Upcoming trainings for September. On September the 15th from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Practicing cultural humility, theory to application. This is part of the racial equity series. Moving from theory to application, this interactive learning opportunity will help develop and strengthen our individual and collective understanding and practices of cultural humility. The training site to register for these trainings is also on this slide, as well as the link for previous trainings. Next slide. COVID response resources. The links will be included on the slide deck when emailed. Next slide, please. Monkeypox resources. These links will also be included on the slide deck when emailed. Next slide, please. ESG resource links. The links in this slide will also be included in the slide deck when it's emailed. Next slide. And now we will pause for a moment for questions. Okay, I don't think we have any questions. So next slide, please. To contact us, if you've had any further questions, please contact us. Annual ESG, please reach out to your ESG representative or esgnofa@hcd.ca.gov. For ESG CV, please reach out to your grant administrator. Next slide, please. And now I will hand it over to LaQuantia.
Thank you, Shavonna. We'll now turn our attention to Michael Thomas and Chris Pitcher as they discuss the foundation of HMIS and provide an interactive clinic overview. Mike, Chris, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Next slide, please. So, hello, everyone. We're happy to be here with you today to provide a very high-level overview of HMIS, and then we'll have a few interactive questions at the end to see what you've learned from this and what you might already know. Next slide, please. So first, what is the definition of HMIS? So it's the Homeless Management Information System. That's a locally administered electronic data collection system that stores longitudinal person-level information about people who access the homeless response system. Or more simply, it's a database that collects information on consumers of homeless assistance services. Each continuum of care is responsible for managing an HMIS using software that complies with HUD's HMIS implementation standards. For the baseline on those standards, you would look to the 2004 data and technical standards. So I'm going to note here that HUD does release data standards for data elements in the system every couple of years. But when we talk about the overall baseline standards, these 2004 ones are the ones that you look to. Those of you who have been around for a minute might know that there was an HMIS interim rule out there in the field for a while, but that is no longer in effect. And so the things that were in that then reverted back to the 2004 data and technical standards. Many federal programs require at least some HMIS data collection or reporting, and that includes the list you see here. What I think is notable that I'm going to point out is that this is from various federal agencies. So you've got HUD with COC and ESG. You've got the department I pulled it up, it's the Department for Families, Children and Families, sorry, for RI, and then you've got SAMHSA for PATH and the VA for SSVF. So the point there being that many different federal agencies rely on this system for reporting purposes. Next slide, please. So this is a hierarchy of what the roles look like in an HMIS implementation. And something that's notable here is that you don't see the HMIS lead or the HMIS vendor at the top of this. The continuum of care is at the top, and specifically the continuum of care's governance. And so it's important to point out that COCs have different governance structures, and HMIS is very often handled by a dedicated HMIS committee. Sometimes those responsibilities might be delegated to the collaborative applicant to some extent, but just be aware it looks different, but the COC is overall the responsible entity. The COC picks an HMIS lead and an HMIS vendor, and then the lead typically manages that contract with the vendor in accordance with the COC's wishes. And then the HMIS lead oversees participating organizations and end users. So those are the organizations with projects and the end users that are putting data into the system and possibly pulling reports and things as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of the COC designates a single HMIS for the geographic area that it covers, and then designates an eligible applicant to manage the COC's HMIS implementation. And then in partnership with the HMIS lead, the COC also reviews, revises, and approves a privacy plan, security plan, and data quality plan, and ensures consistent participation of funding recipients and subrecipients in the HMIS. The COC also has to ensure that the HMIS is administered in compliance with all of HUD's requirements and any other local ones that might exist, and does this in collaboration with the HMIS lead. And then along those lines, the COC is also responsible for monitoring the HMIS lead to ensure that they are managing the implementation properly. Next slide, please. And so this is what responsibilities look like for the HMIS lead. The lead oversees day-to-day functions of operating the HMIS, and that includes things like training, help desk responses, technical support, and things along those lines. The lead develops local HMIS policies and procedures, including the data quality, privacy plan, and security plan. You'll remember that I mentioned that as a responsibility of the COC, but it is done very much in partnership with the HMIS lead in most instances. The lead monitors compliance with applicable HMIS standards and administers HMIS vendor contracts and agreements. So as I had mentioned that before too, typically the lead oversees the contract with the vendor. And then the HMIS lead executes HMIS participation and end user agreements with participating organizations and collaborates with and monitors the HMIS vendor. Next slide, please. And then the next thing we have here is the HMIS vendor. So that is the company that is providing the HMIS software that the COC is using. And without HMIS software, there is no HMIS. And so clear and established expectations with the HMIS lead in contracts and or agreements. So that's kind of that contract management process. The vendor goes through that with the HMIS lead in most cases. And the vendor must ensure clarity on HUD and federal partner expectations and provide technical support and assistance when there are issues with how the system is functioning. And then the vendor develops and manages the software, and they do that in collaboration with the HMIS lead, because in most instances there are customizations and things like that built into the software. And so that's where the lead and the vendor work together to implement that. Next slide, please. And finally, we have the participating organizations and end users. So those are, they do data collection and data entry into the system. And so one of the big responsibilities there is data quality monitoring. So we're thinking, is the data being entered in a timely fashion? Is it complete? Is it accurate? And is it consistent? And so the responsibility there is to provide quality data so it can be used for community planning processes and for reporting and things like that. And then there's also participating in the point in time and housing inventory count processes. So when you think about the housing inventory count and the specifically the sheltered point in time count, a lot of that information comes from HMIS in many communities. Privacy and security compliance. So that's when we're thinking about the end user agreements and the organizational agreements that these entities sign to participate in the HMIS. They have to make sure that they comply with what they signed. And then participating in meetings and work groups is a way to receive continuous training on those issues and make sure that they're always up to date on what's happening with the system. And then HMIS policy and procedure compliance, just like what we just said for privacy and security compliance, they also must make sure that they comply with HMIS policies and procedures in the COC. And collaborating with the HMIS Lead and other participating organizations, that's especially important when we think about things like coordinated entry, which is often implemented through HMIS. The participating organizations and end users typically have to collaborate with each other as well. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it over to Chris for this slide.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining us this morning. I'm Chris Pitcher from ICF, the Training and Technical Assistance Lead for ESG CV, and I want to talk a little bit about HMIS and how it relates to the ESG program. Next slide. So one of the very first requirements we need to talk through is coverage. One of the things that ESG requires is that the recipient and those folks that are receiving funds as the subrecipient must ensure that all data on persons served and all activities under ESG are entered into the appropriate community-wide HMIS in the area in which those persons are located. If you're a victim service provider, rules are a little different. You are prohibited from entering data into HMIS per the Violence Against Women Act. So you therefore must use an HMIS comparable database. An HMIS comparable database is an HMIS database only for you. It must meet all the same requirements. It must meet everything that an HMIS does to be considered comparable. And a lot of our HMIS solutions offer a comparable database for victim service providers or VSPs. So that shouldn't be a barrier to compliance. Note that this, all of this applies at the provider level, not the project level. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. If you're a legal service provider, you may use HMIS, you may not. That's kind of a one-on-one call. I will say that as we've seen ESG mature through ESG CV, we have a lot less folks actually being legal service providers that use a comparable database. Most are using HMIS. But if they're using a comparable database, it needs to meet all the requirements of an HMIS to meet the compliance with the usage of HMIS for the ESG program. Next slide. All right, let's get a little deeper into comparable databases. They are just like an HMIS, a relational database that meets all of our data standards, including security and privacy. The Violence Against Women Act is very clear about keeping victims of domestic violence safe. That is why we don't use HMIS. So certainly you want to make sure that as you look at your comparable database, you're not setting that database up to not be safe, to not be secure, to not be private. We need to make sure that we can collect all the data elements required by HMIS in our comparable databases. You may have a lot of other things that you do with a comparable database, but it must at least meet the minimum data collection requirements of an HMIS and allow us to collect data throughout the stages of data collection and throughout the stages of where we have folks in programs, so shelter, street outreach, permanent housing and such. We need to be able to follow those in the relational comparable database. Next slide. In HMIS, all projects must be set up under one of the following components: street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, and rapid rehousing. What don't you see on this list? Legal services. Legal services must be set up underneath the component for which it is funded. Those legal services could be provided at many different locations here. So it's really about where we put our legal services funding. Is it in an emergency shelter? Where is it? That's where it will be set up under then. That's kind of a newer clarification. I think that's been a little confusing for a few years. You also won't see supportive service only projects. We have a lot of programs, specifically rapid rehousing programs, that might only be doing part of the rapid rehousing program. For instance, an EHV program is doing the vouchering, but the rapid rehab, not the EHV program, let's go a different route. That the rapid rehousing other non-ESG funded provider is doing the subsidy, but the case management and stabilization service is being done through ESG. That would still be set up under rapid rehousing. There is no option to set up under support service only. So there are a lot of nuances to this. If you get hung up on how to set up a project, certainly reach out to us. we can certainly help you through that. But there are a lot of nuances to make sure that you get these things set up properly. I didn't even talk about temporary emergency shelter under ESGCV, where that fits under shelter, under emergency shelter. The ESG HMIS program manual has a lot of these details and is also being updated to discuss the situation of having someone who is in street outreach be in shelter, but have the street outreach still have connection, and also what happens to someone who's in HP and then they're in rapid rehousing. So we are creating a little bit new guidance coming out this fall to further clarify how to set up and how to manage some of these real life situations that arise in our data systems. Next slide. All right, a little bit more specific on project setup here in the state of California. It's a little bit different because we've got a lot of stuff going on in our HMIS with all of our different kinds of state funding. So we want to make sure that our ESG and ESGCV funds are easily identified. So we're asking all HMIS administrators to set up projects based on the procedures established by their HMIS, supported by the ESG HMIS manual and any guidance set out either by Cal ICH, California Emergency Council, or by California HCD to further refine how we set up programs in for ESG and ESGCV and all other state programs. At a minimum, our setup procedures must include our project descriptor data elements and require the HMIS lead and the COC to consult and review that those are updated at least annually and as needed. Do note that for the ESGCV program, we are working on this for the annual ESG program, but for ESGCV right now specifically, we need to make sure that you have a grantee identifier in data element 2.06 number 2, the ESG contract number. We have set that out. We have sent out guidance on that for annual ESG as well. This allows us to pull data from HDIS instead of bugging all 40 HMIS implementations for data. So this is a really important step in project setup as you get funded each year under annual ESG or as you look at your ESGCV funding. Once those identifiers are in HMIS and HDIS pulls that on a quarterly basis, we can then begin doing our outcome reporting. A couple of weeks back, I did a session on preliminary data. It's built off this concept. So this is a very, very important concept. Next slide, please. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Chris. That is why you have the project setup slides, because you know that in California. So, data collection requirements. All ESG funded projects must collect what you see here on your screen. All of the universal data elements, or UDEs, as defined by HUD. All program-specific data elements for the applicable project type, as defined by HUD, and any special or custom data elements required by the COC and or the project's funders, and that includes, if any, were dictated by California HCD. Next slide, please. So when we say universal data elements, this is what we're talking about. There are universal identifiers that include all the things you see on your screen. Not going to read them out, one by one, but it's things like your name, your social security number, race, ethnicity, veteran status, etc. And then you've got universal project state elements. So like your project start and exit date, destination, housing move-in date, prior living situation is a very important one. But these are universal data elements. We did want to include a note here to call out a known issue with tribal nations. And the note is that race is a known issue for data collection when serving members of tribal nations, because they often do not identify with the options that are provided by HUD for this and related categories. And so, HUD provides the programming specs, and the HMIS must be built to those specs, and it includes specific options for categories like race and ethnicity. And sometimes people do not identify with those options, the way they're worded, the way they're presented. So we just want to point out that when we think about data quality and that sort of thing, that is a known issue specifically for tribal nations in California. And I see you came off mute there.
I did, Mike, because we're talking about tribal nations. And as folks know, we have funded 7 tribal nations in ESGCV, and we have created a data element for tribal nation affiliation. It is only being used in the HMIS implementations that have tribal nations already established. But if that is useful to any HMIS user or system administrator listening today, happy to share our methodology. I also believe that as HUD looks at the 2024 data standards, that tribal nation and tribal nation affiliation is likely to be thought about or even implemented in 2024. Those 2024 data standards get released this year and implemented next year. So we'll know a lot more as fall turns into winter of what those will look like, and I get those out. But tribal nation affiliation, again, we've got something locally built for California. If you want to leverage that, you're welcome to, or you can wait to see what the federal requirements will be for tribal nation affiliation.
Thank you for mentioning that. I am working with one of the tribal nations on HMIS, and I did a walkthrough in the test environment, and I was really excited to see that data field. I did not know it was going to be there, but it is a cool data field. Next slide, please. So these are some common program-specific data elements. Again, any program-specific data elements associated with the project type that you're entering data for will pop up in your workflow in HMIS and will need to be entered as required. And again, I'm not going to read it all, but we're talking about things like income sources, disability, substance use disorder, date of engagement, which is a really big one. I'm not even going to go down that wormhole at the moment, but it is important for things like street outreach. And then coordinated entry assessment and coordinated entry event. But I do want to note that those are dependent upon how the local COC has structured the coordinated entry system. So while coordinated entry runs through HMIS in a lot of communities, it can look different, but just know that that is an important part of data entry in HMIS, depending on how it's set up in your community. Next slide, please. So data quality. You know, we talk a lot about data quality in the HMIS world, and this is why. When data is not timely, accurate, and complete, it can lead to poor decision-making ability regarding funding, coordinated entry, and provision of services, among other things. So, you know, HMIS is overall a requirement, right? It's a federal requirement. And it's easy to think about it just in those terms, how it flows up in the reporting to HUD and that sort of thing, which is important in and of itself. But many communities use this data in ways that we're going to talk about in a second to make important decisions. And when the data is not good, it hinders the ability to make those decisions effectively. So, you know, when we think about data quality, that is why it is so important. Next slide, please. As promised, we'll talk about why that matters. Next slide, please. So HMIS data is used in a number of ways. For people on this call, I think one of the most important is probably going to be the top right square that you, or the top right portion of the square. So ESG grants. We're thinking about things like the CAPER, which is the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. Reimbursements, funding competitions, the consolidated plan for the ESG jurisdiction, and the annual action plan. Data is used for all of those things. And that's probably the most immediate for subrecipients and sub-subrecipients. But there's all of these other really important things too. So in terms of the continuum of care, system performance measures, the COC has to submit those to HUD annually. And the data is what drives them. It's where it comes from. It's pulled straight out of HMIS. And then there's the longitudinal system analysis, which might even be more dependent because it comes out in a CSV file and gets uploaded into a repository with HUD. And so that is another really important report that the COC submits that tells HUD how things are going in your community in addressing homelessness. The point in time count, which we mentioned before, also the housing inventory count we mentioned before. Annual performance reports must be submitted by every COC funded project. That is how HUD looks at projects at the project level. That comes right out of HMIS and gets uploaded in CSV form. The coordinated entry system we talked about, and just in general, any kind of decision the COC wants to make about its system, those decisions, we want them to be data informed and data driven. But the data has to be accurate, timely, and complete. When we think about other federal partner programs, it's very similar to the reports I just talked about with the continuum of care. There are other reports that go in for those programs, and the data drives those reports, and so they need to be accurate. And then there's other stakeholders. So when we think about reporting to consolidated planning jurisdictions, COCs are required to collaborate with the consolidated planning jurisdictions in their area to help them with their annual action plan and their consolidated plan. And this data can really help with that process. And then finally, we think about custom reports for planning and collaboration. There's a number of ways that custom reports could be used by a number of different stakeholders, but they don't work unless the data is accurate. Next slide, please. So I mentioned the CAPER. That is probably the most immediate thing that is of concern to ESG grantees and subrecipients and sub-subrecipients when we think about data. What you see on your screen here is only one part of the CAPER reporting process, but this describes how the aggregate numbers of people served with ESG funding are reported to HUD annually. All of the CAPER data is submitted directly into a repository called SAGE, and it's submitted by the subrecipient or the sub-subrecipient running the program. So the recipient sets up a funded project in SAGE, and then submission links go out to the subrecipients or sub-subrecipients, and they use those links. So they pull a report from the HMIS system, a set of CSV files, and those get uploaded into SAGE using the reports that they pulled, or the link that they were sent. I apologize. A big note here, corrections to the data. When the data is not clean for CAPER reporting and corrections need to be made, they must be made directly in the HMIS client record at the subrecipient or sub-subrecipient level. You cannot change that data in the CSV files to make it upload into SAGE. You have to do it in the client record. So what that means is, you know, you're like basically California HCD cannot help if your CSV files don't look good. It is on the agency to maintain data quality because those corrections ultimately have to be made in the client file, usually by the person working with the client. So I just want to make that point really clear because it's really important, and it illustrates why good data quality up front is important, because it keeps you from having to go back and make those corrections. Next slide, please. So now we are going to go into our lightning round. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have a few questions to see what we know about HMIS and data. So I think we've got about 5 of them. Let's jump right in. Next slide, please. So I'll grab the first one. Which entity should a ESG let me ask first, do we have polls set up for these?
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Perfect, thank you. So what's going to happen is a poll will pop up on your screen with the answer choices. Pick the answer that you like the most. These are completely anonymous. We cannot tell who is answering what, so feel free to take any guess that you want if you don't know it. We usually put a not sure option. Not sure is always a good answer when it comes to complex federal funding, so always feel free to put that too. But here's the first one. Which entity should an ESG program subrecipient or with which entity should the ESG program subrecipient work to ensure that their projects are set up properly in HMIS? So if you just got your ESG funding, who would you work with to get that project set up? The COC's collaborative applicant, the HMIS lead, the HMIS committee for your local COC, or the HMIS vendor? And I cannot see how the answers are coming in, so I will just throw that whoever's controlling.
I could see it though, Mike, so I'll let you know
Cool.
when we're a good place.
Perfect. All right, looks like that one is closed, and we have a strong majority saying the HMIS lead. So let's pop that answer up. Well done, everyone. The correct answer is, in fact, the HMIS lead for the continuum of care where the projects are located. The other entities listed do have roles associated with HMIS, but the lead is the entity that is most directly able to ensure that your projects are set up properly in the system. Well done. Next slide, please.
All right, I'll take this one, Mike. A subrecipient of California HCD ESG runs several projects, only one of which primarily serves survivors of domestic violence. Which of the following is true? The one project serving domestic violence survivors should be in a comparable database instead of HMIS. All the subrecipients projects should be set up at HMIS. All subrecipient projects should be set up in a comparable database. We do not have enough information to decide between HMIS and a comparable database.
This is one of my trademark kind of mean questions. Sorry, everyone.
All right, let's give it another one or two. There we go. All right, so most folks are saying, overwhelming amount, 76% of folks saying the one project serving DV should be in a comparable database instead of HMS. Let's see the answer. All these projects should be set up in HMIS. Serving victims of domestic violence does not make you a victim service provider. Victim service providers, through the Violence Against Women Act, must use a comparable database. If you're not a victim service provider, you do not need to use a comparable database. That was kind of a tricky question. I thought the fourth answer, we do not know, might also be fine, because we didn't give you a lot of information there, but we did not call this subrecipient anywhere a victim service provider. Mike, up to you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. All right. Which of the following is a type of data that must be entered into HMIS when enrolling a participant in an ESG-funded project? Must you enter universal data elements, project descriptor data elements, metadata elements, or VAWA-specific data elements?
We got booed in the chat, Mike. I think your tricky questions have finally hit their audience right where it needed to be.
Yep.
Boo.
I will say to the public that we gave that question to California HCD staff first, so you are not the first ones to be hit with it. All right, looks like we have a solid 85% saying universal data elements. Let's throw that answer up. That is the correct answer. Universal data elements must be entered into HMIS. For all projects and clients, project descriptor data elements are entered by the HMIS administrator when they set up the project. Metadata elements are automatically generated in the background, and then VAWA does not prescribe any specific data elements. Next slide, please.
All right, we got ourselves a data quality question here. When developing your HMIS policy procedures for staff at the subrecipient level, which of the following is the most likely not to be included? So not included in your policy procedures. That data should be timely. Data must be only entered by staff paid with each ESG HMIS dollars. Data should be accurate and data should be complete. I feel like finally we asked a question that might not be too hard. I'll be surprised though.
You know, there is research showing that if you're not getting things wrong 15% of the time, you're probably not learning anything. It's too easy.
Well said. All right, let's go ahead and close that poll. The overwhelming majority say the second, data must only be entered by those funded to do so through ESG-CV. The answer is, yep. While staff funded through ESG HMIS will primarily perform that, it is not a must be done that way. How the data gets entered and how you pay for that data to be entered does not have to stick to just that funding source, because almost every funding source has the ability to fund HMIS. Federal partners do, certainly all HUD programs do. So that is not a requirement that ESG funds only can support data entry for ESG data. Mike?
All right, and next slide, please. This will be our final question. Which of the following is true of subrecipient responsibilities related to CAPER reporting? Subrecipients must upload a CAPER CSV file for each ESG funded project. Subrecipients that are VSPs are exempt from CAPER reporting. Subrecipients must set up each ESG funded project in HUD's SAGE repository, or subrecipients must clean and correct data directly in the CAPER CSV files. Only one of those is true. Which one do you think it is? Ooh, we have a nice split there. We have 41% saying subrecipients must upload the CSV file for each project, and we have 44% saying that they must set up each project in HUD's Sage reporting repository. Let's put the answer up and see which one is right. So the first one is correct. Subrecipients are responsible for uploading CAPER CSV files to Sage based on instructions from California HCD. Victim service providers are not exempt. And then ESG funded projects are not set up in Sage by the subrecipient. The projects are set up in Sage by the primary ESG recipient, which in this case is California HCD. And then finally, we mentioned the data errors here. As we talked about, those cannot be corrected in the CSV files. They must be corrected directly in client records. And that wraps us up on the lightning round. If we want to go to the next slide, we have time for Q&A.
Yeah, and if you want to ask a question, you can come off mute and ask us. You can put it in the chat. You can raise your hand, whatever you want, and we will happily sit here and answer questions. Hopefully, only easy ones.
I don't think I've earned any easy questions.
Not with what you just did in that lightning round. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so there's no reason not to give you back 8 minutes of your day. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. We got something hot off the presses. LaQuante, what is that question about?
This says, it's from Keith. It says our CFC has a lot of case management projects set up in our HMIS. My understanding is that case management should be attached to projects instead of a separate project. Is that correct?
That is correct, Keith. So that was one of the things I was mentioning in one of my ramblings in the middle of the thing is for ESG, there's only 4 project types that you can even set up. Shelter, street outreach, homeless prevention, rapid housing. There isn't a case management. There isn't a supportive services only. They need to be attached to one of those 4 categories. The most common is rapid rehousing, having someone just doing the housing stability case management and someone else doing the vouchering of the rapid rehousing and marrying those 2 projects up. We have heard some concerns from other HMIS leads across California, not specific to you, Keith. I'm actually talking about another community where once they do this within their HMIS and they try to pull a housing inventory count out of the HMIS, it's messing it up. So it looks like they have more rapid rehousing than they actually do. So we need to be careful of some system specific things like that as we make these decisions. So yeah, just be very careful. Mike, anything to add to that?
No, I don't think I have anything to add. It sounds like we're answering specifically in the context of ESG, which absolutely it needs to be attached to one of those 4 things. You can have supportive services only projects, but they're not going to be projects funded by ESG.
Exactly.
Richmond now asks, what about prevention and diversion projects with the state? What component category will they be aligned with during those setups?
Oh, I think that is a Mike Thomas level tricky question, Richmond. So I'm going to do the best to untangle what I think I'm reading here, which is when we get prevention and diversion funding from HAP or other state funds, how do those get set up? I think right now what we have in the state of California is a lack of guidance from our state partners that tell us specifically what to do with these very flexible funding sources and how HMIS and data collection operate. So I would look for more information on that coming forward. It's easier for us as California HCD to say this is the way ESG and ESGCV works because we have a specific program manual for that at the federal level. We don't necessarily have anything like that for these state funds yet. So on a case-by-case basis, we're going to have to talk through those with our funding partners and hope that we get really clear guidance out from those state partners in the future. Mike, anything you'd add there?
No, I think that's a good answer. I'm hesitant to add anything because setting up prevention and diversion is tricky in HMIS, and I've been on the community side of that, so that is a good answer. Well, I see one more question that popped up in there. I can grab that
Yes.
one if you want.
Okay, I was just getting ready to read it. I had to unmute myself, but go ahead.
No, you can go ahead and read it. I'll answer it.
Okay. Does HCD conduct a CAPER report yearly or only sample projects?
That is a good question because I did not delineate in the presentation the difference between ESG CV and annual ESG. So for annual ESG, you follow the process which I went through in the presentation, and that is an annual report that it has to be done every year. And it's not just a sampling, it includes every funded ESG project from that fiscal year. So when we talk about annual ESG, that's the normal annual allotment of ESG funds that recipients get. ESG CV is a special allotment of funds, and the CAPER reporting for that looks a little different. It is done on a quarterly basis, but it is not up to the subrecipients to do that reporting for ESG CV. It's done by HMIS Leads generally, although I don't know if that's different in California, but I know in general the HMIS Leads have been bearing the responsibility for those quarterly reports. So it depends on which ESG funding stream you're talking about. But yeah, that's how the CAPER reporting works. Do you want to add to that, Chris?
I do not. No.
Okay.
Okay, well, that does look like that's all that we have. Did anyone else want to unmute themselves or ask any other questions right now? Well, we do get to give you all back 3 minutes into your day. But thank you for your questions, and thank you, Mike and Chris, for providing this overview on HMIS. Please note, a quick survey will be launched as you exit this session, and we ask that you take a moment to respond. Thank you for joining us. Look out for the follow-up materials in your inbox within the next day or two, and we look forward to seeing you next week.